Hello and welcome to this special edition of State of the Economy. We have with us Minister of State for Finance, Jayant Sinha, who will talk to us about the economy and where it is headed 1 year after Mr. Narendra Modi took charge as Prime Minister of this country. As you know, Mr. Jayant Sinha brings a rare blend of global experience as well as local. He's been as comfortable raising money on Wall Street as he has been fighting elections in Hazaribagh and well, looking at the needs of the very poor in his home state of Jharkhand. So, we'll try to get a sense from Mr. Jayant Sinha on where the economy is headed in the global context, in the domestic context, and get a sense of what's going to happen. Welcome to our show, Mr. Jayant Sinha. So tell us, 1 year on, what are your worries? Your government has taken a lot of decisions. There's no lack of effort, but we are caught in a business cycle, which is partly global, partly domestic. Private investment is not coming forth, and foreign investment also. You've been a money raiser, so therefore, could you just give us a sense of where are we headed in the context of investment, consumption, growth?
No, that's a great set of questions, Venu, and thank you very much for having me again on your show. It's great to be here again with you to discuss all of these issues. I would say that we've done a terrific job in this 1 year that we've been in office, and I would say, in fact, that we've done more for the economy in this 1 year than I think virtually any government has done in its first year in office. You have to remember that the economy was like a train that had derailed. The train was off the tracks. We put the train back on the tracks. We've got the train to move forward. It's accelerating. It's becoming almost a Rajdhani. It's not a bullet train yet. So there's work to be done as far as the bullet train is concerned. The most important aspect of the economy that people need to understand right now is that we've restored macroeconomic stability. When we inherited the economy a year ago, India was considered a macroeconomic junk status type economy. All of the indicators, the important macro indicators, whether it's inflation, GDP growth rate, fiscal deficit, current account deficit, all of these indicators were really in very bad shape. And that's why, as I said, the economy was off the rails. In the last year, we've been able to get the economy back on the rails and restore macroeconomic stability. We've been very fortunate. We've had the tailwind of lower oil prices to help us.
Virtually halving from the peak.
But you have to remember that most of the benefit of that came in the last 4 or 5 months of the fiscal year. So we've only really gotten 4 or 5 months of that benefit. Most of that benefit is going to kick in this year, and we're already starting to see that in the indirect tax collections.
But that bit of luck was partly neutralized by the farm sector, unseasonal
agrarian distress and so on. So certainly you're right. I mean, you get some, you lose some. But the important thing to recognize now is that because we've restored that macroeconomic stability, we've got that foundation in place, we now are poised for a major acceleration. Now, there's a very important aspect of this that needs to be understood. Because we had to restore macroeconomic stability, it was necessary to pursue a prudent monetary policy, which means rates were relatively high, and also to be able to exercise significant fiscal consolidation. So because we had to do that, both high interest rates as well as fiscal consolidation, we had a situation in the economy where business conditions have been very tight. So now if you're hearing a lot of people and a lot of chatter
asking for rate cut.
No, about the rate cuts and also saying, look, business is tight, the spending isn't happening. That's perfectly to be expected when you go through a consolidation phase in the economy. That is necessary. Unless we do that, inflation, which had been running at over 8, 9, 10% for the last 7 years, Venu, for 7 years we've had sticky, entrenched inflation that's been running at those levels. And that inflation is the worst tax you can impose on poor people.
But now that's not a worry anymore?
No, I think we've taken care of that. And that's why we've had to do the consolidation we've done this year, which is to be able to keep interest rates high. And now you can see consumer price inflation is down to 5% levels. That creates the room now for the RBI to bring rates down. And that's really my important point.
Do you also believe that we are behind the curve on interest rate reduction?
that my own personal view, and I'm
you
not
had 5 months of negative wholesale price index.
well. I'm not the expert on this, and it's really not my sort of decision.
But what's your
it
sense?
Really is the RBI's decision.
You've been a finance man.
Yes, exactly. My own personal view on this would be that yes, we are at a stage now where rates do need to come down a fair bit, and once rates come down, we get the cyclical upswing, and along with the cyclical upswing, the public investment that we're going to do this year, plus the structural boost that we're going to bring in play because of the GST, because of what we're doing, for example, in the power sector and other sectors where the big structural reforms are happening. This combination of the cyclical upswing plus the public investment plus the structural reforms, I think is going to power us forward in a very, very robust way going forward.
Can I, Mr. Sinha, can I sound a slightly different note here? Because I've spoken to some of your ministers who run infrastructure ministries, and they feel that if the budget is essentially the budget, key signaling in the budget was that you are resorting to a big public sector driven investment program, right? Since private investment is not forthcoming in the next 6 months, in the immediate future. So, if that being the case, some of them argue that should fiscal deficit be such a should you be so fundamentalist about reaching a 3% fiscal deficit? Why can't India have a, say, 4.5% fiscal deficit? What's wrong with it? And at a time when you're trying to lift investments, a 4.5% fiscal deficit is not such a bad thing. Combined with a monetary easing, the two could actually come together and give a great kicker to the economy. Would you agree with that?
I think I would be more on the fiscal consolidation side myself. And I think we've tried to strike that appropriate balance between fiscal consolidation. We are, after all,
you paused a little.
We are not going down to 3.6% on the fiscal deficit. We are staying at 3.9%, while at the same time providing, a big push as far as public investment is concerned. And the 1 lakh crores we are hopefully going to see the railways invest, the 1 lakh crores that hopefully we'll have the highway sector investing, I think is a tremendous boost in and of itself. And there are real issues around the ability to actually execute from a standing start that much as far as public investment in the railways, for instance, is concerned. Similarly, on roads, can we build up that kind of execution capacity this quickly? So I think we've kind of struck the right balance right now. But I do want to come back to the fiscal deficit question, Venu, so you understand it and your viewers and people of India understand how serious a matter it is. On the one hand, when we say that our fiscal deficit is 4% or 3.9%, it sounds like a small number. But when you put it in the context of the expenditure that we have, as well as the tax collection that we have, our tax collection in total, I think in the coming fiscal year will be around 12 lakh crores. And our fiscal deficit in terms of actual borrowings that we are going to have to do is 5.5 lakh crores. So on a revenue collection of 12 lakh crores, borrowing of 5.5 lakh crores, our expenditure is around 18 lakh crores. So you tell me, can we run a business, a household, a shop with those kinds of numbers when your expenditure is 18 lakh crores, you're running a deficit of 5.5 lakh crores. Those numbers don't compute. And if you actually look at India's fiscal deficit and you compare it to other large emerging markets, it's very high. If you look at a debt to GDP and compare it to other large emerging markets, it's very high. So that creates a fragility and it creates a situation for us that's really not sustainable in the long run.
So you'd remain in the fiscal consolidation camp?
Yeah, I think I very much belong to sort of let's pursue a prudent fiscal policy, because if we can bring the fiscal deficit down to 3% or even lower of GDP, which we have been, by the way, when the NDA demerged office in 2004, the fiscal deficit was down at those levels, and we put in place the FRBM where we said we've got to keep it at 3%. Our states keep it at 3%. That's really where we need to be.
Okay. So, Mr. Sinha, how do you look at the investment cycle? Is the business cycle still, will it take a while to revive? I keep looking at data and experts say that industry is still working at just about 65% capacity. So when will the new investment cycle kick in? Because typically businesses start new investments once their capacity crosses 90%.
So I think we are at least 6 to 12 months away. from private investment really getting going again. The problem here, of course, is that because of the policy paralysis of the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years prior to our government coming in, there are many, many projects that because of government inaction, lack of government decision making and so on, have stalled. And because they have stalled, and there were of course certain cases of promoter default and promoter sort of actions that were
issues are getting sorted out.
But you know, we are trying, those of course are a different matter altogether, but the vast majority of stalled projects are stalled because of government inaction. And that's of course created a really bad overhang for the economy.
Can I sound a slightly different note here? Sure. You know, some bit of data which compiled by CMI, etc., also one RTI to which Finance Ministry replied, said that a lot of projects are not kicking off because the promoter is also losing interest, but he is trying to give the impression that it is because of various government policy related issues, you know, like land acquisition. This too much is being attributed to government policy related issues, and the private sector is not taking upon itself the responsibility, whatever it has to do is not in focus.
So there, Venu, I wouldn't try to generalize in any way. I think we have to go in there, look at each project on its merits, understand what the issues are. The fact of the matter is that we do have to resolve these stalled projects. Unless we resolve the stalled projects, the private investment cycle will not get started. Promoters haven't seen good returns on their projects in the past. So if you've been burnt, you know, once bitten, twice shy. So if you've not made returns, you poured thousands of crores into some of these projects and your returns have been very poor, you'll be hardly likely to want to invest again. So that's a big challenge that we face. But ultimately what's going to happen is because of the public sector investment that's going in, we are going to need cement, we are going to need...
So you'll crowd in private investment.
Exactly. So ultimately once all of that starts to move, the capacity is going to get used up and then people will start to put in more capacity and hopefully then the private sector investment cycle will kick off as well.
Okay. We'll take a small break here. Please don't go away and keep watching RSTV. Welcome back to State of the Economy. Mr. Sinha, you rightly spoke about problems that the private sector is facing. Corporate stretched balance sheets and how projects are stalled, and government is dealing with it at one level, and at another, government is trying to push public investment so that at least the investment cycle gets a boost. Now, the private sector stalled projects is a big problem, which you as a financial engineer, you've had experience in finance. How do you deal with vast amounts of money which are stuck in bank balance sheets, which are meant to fund power projects, ports, roads, and highly leveraged corporate sector? And one has observed that it's the same 15-20 groups which actually went into everything, you know, from telecom to road to ports, and that's why they're overstretched. So as a finance man, how would you sort of unbundle these assets and make them viable?
Yeah, well, I've been an engineer and I've been a finance person, but I really haven't been a financial engineer. But this is one of the very difficult problems we are facing in the short term as far as the economy is concerned.
But isn't this critical? One of the most critical things.
It is. And the Honorable Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's office, as well as all the concerned infrastructure ministries and so on, are really focusing very hard on this problem, and they're doing, you know, what can be done as quickly as possible about all of this. The coal auctions were very important. Obviously, what we'll be doing as far as iron ore and other sort of auctions are concerned is going to be very important. There's a lot of work that we're doing as far as the financing side of the equation is concerned with the banks. Obviously, the land acquisition bill also is an important component of all of this. So the fact of the matter is that there are 5 or 6 different levers you have to pull to make this happen, and it requires everybody to work together collaboratively to enable this to take off. I would say that, you know, there are 2 or 3 very important short-term things and then some longer-term things. The very important short-term things are to find out, you know, where are there blockages in terms of government clearances like environment and so on, which, by the way, most of which we have already solved.
Those are unblocked.
Yeah, so we've got most of those going, right? Number one, on short term. Number two, on the short term is to see what can be done as far as land acquisition is concerned. I'll give you a specific example from my own constituency that I know very well. Is we have a very important railway project that's going from Hazaribagh to Ranchi. But for that, we need to be able to do land acquisition along the way. When we did not have the land acquisition ordinance right now, it was not possible to actually do the notification and the acquisition in a streamlined way to do that. Once the land ordinance came along, it was possible to notify and acquire that land. And so finally, that railway project is moving along. Otherwise, it had been stuck for years. That's an example of where, certain things as far as the government is concerned on land acquisition and so on are necessary, which is why the land acquisition bill is necessary, and that's why we have the ordinance in place as well. And then number three, we need to be able to make sure that the banks are able to get together in a decisive way and are able to actually either decide they don't want to back the project or back the project appropriately and move it forward. So there's some work required from the banks as well. So in the short term, those are the three important things that are necessary. Once we do that, we can get these projects moving as quickly as we can. Now, longer term.
Either under present promoters or under some new promoters.
Now, that's one of the longer term issues, Venu, because right now it's very difficult for us to move a set of promoters out and to bring in a new set of promoters.
That can't happen in the short term.
There is no way for us to do it in the short term. So from the long term, and which is in the budget right now, we've said we're going to put in place a bankruptcy code, and the bankruptcy code, once you're in default, will enable you to take out a set of promoters and bring in new promoters. So that's a second very important long-term thing. That's a first very important long-term thing that's required. Second very important long-term thing that's required is we have to change the way we finance these projects. Part of the reason these projects are stuck is because there were fairly tight timelines by which time the project had to be executed and the banks could continue to support it. The banks themselves did not have access to long-term financing. So we have to move to much more of a corporate debt market, longer-term project financing for these projects so that we can actually deal with these issues of projects getting delayed by a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. The moment they get delayed that much, don't generate cash flow, our banks have to provision for them, convert them into a non-performing asset and so on. And that creates tremendous stress from a financing point of view. So that's the bankruptcy code number one, and number two, coming up with a better long-term financing approach for projects like this so that they don't get stalled in the future. Those are the longer-term things we have to do.
Now, coming to Mr. Sinha, the problem of employment. If you remember the last time we met on Rajya Sabha on a similar chat, you said that employment will have to be this government's key focus. Now, where do you see employment going? Because in this phase of slowdown, there seems to be more employment is being shed rather than being added as so far.
No, employment growth, in fact, as I was saying earlier,
some data which shows that
when we are going through a consolidation phase as we've gone through in the last year, employment growth is going to be slow, and it is slow. You're absolutely right. If you look at the three primary stakeholders and three primary priorities for the government, those are युवाओं को रोजगार, किसानों की समृद्धि, गरीबों का कल्याण. These are our three things that we are really focusing on. Now, if you come to the युवाओं को रोजगार part of it, obviously with Make in India, with what we are trying to do with the Mudra agency and so on, is extraordinarily important. Obviously,
encouraging entrepreneurs, self-employed entrepreneurs.
Yes, so rather than be an employee, be an employer. Right? And so I think the key in all of this, in terms of getting more employment for our youth, of course we have to skill them and so on and get them into manufacturing and so on, which will happen. But that's 20% of the solution, I think, because of just the 10, 12 million people joining the workforce. You have to remember that our organized sector has never added more than 1 million.
Exactly, that's the point I was coming to.
So yes, we can double that, we can get to 4 million people, but that's still 20% of the solution. I think 80% of the solution, or a very major portion of the solution, is going to have to be what we do for our small micro businesses.
Exactly.
And there, I think the game changer.
Capital-intensive businesses are not going to add to employment in a big way.
And the modern economy is not very labor-intensive. It's much more capital and knowledge-intensive.
Can I ask you something here? If you look at the Chinese experience, between 1978 and 2003, they created 16 million town and village enterprises, which added eventually about 30% to the GDP and 50% to the industrial value add, and created 130 million employment, of which nearly 50%, 40% were farmers. Do you think an experiment of that kind is needed in India to create labor-intensive employment?
I think the labor-intensive employment is going to come from a certain amount of manufacturing, which I think is bound to happen, which is great, like in electronics or in solar and so on, and that's great. And services, of course, will continue to take a large share. So those are there. I think the fact that we are going to be able to provide, small entrepreneurs, whether it is a beautician, whether it's a thelawala, whether it's a cycle repair person, we're going to be able to provide them the financing as well as the support.
So are the banks and the Mudra bank that you've created, are they mentally geared towards really scaling up loans to smaller players?
No, absolutely. They definitely want to do that. I myself have invested in companies that provide microfinancing, loans of 5 lakhs, 2 lakhs, 3 lakhs, somewhere in that range.
Business improvement loans, etc.
And those actually, they work well. And so the idea of the Mudra Bank basically is to be able to provide wholesale financing for these kinds of NBFCs that serve the very small and micro businesses, and also to be able to standardize protocols, to be able to do information sharing and all of that, so that it's possible to get financing into the hands of these people, and they can add the second shop, they can add one more thela, they can add the necessary equipment, they can employ more people. That's all going to be very important. Now, the other thing that's happening, by the way, in the labor ministry, which is also profoundly important, is that we are saying that the unorganized sector should have access to similar benefits like you get in the organized sector. And these benefits include obviously health insurance, accident insurance, life insurance.
Atal Pension Yojana is part of that, right?
All those social security schemes plus health insurance and so on will be available for the unorganized sector through the smart card that the labor ministry is putting out. And so that will make employment with these small and micro businesses also a lot more attractive, because people will be able to get access to the kinds of benefits that they're only getting in the organized sector.
But there's one criticism, Mr. Sinha, that while you are coming up with new welfare schemes, there is this criticism that the centre has substantially cut down funding of existing schemes revolving around women, child welfare.
When people say that, they are either politically motivated or ignorant or both.
I'll tell you, my assessment is that while you've cut the central funding by some 75,000 crore, you have simultaneously given states about 100,000 crore more. Now, can you ensure that the states continue those schemes? That's what my question is. I'm not saying that you're financially...
No, I agree. That's what I'm saying. The people who are making those statements are not aware of the facts. The reality is we want better public services for our people. And the best public services are going to be delivered by people who are closest to the people.
So you expect the states to do it?
I'd rather have the state of Jharkhand worry about primary education, worry about basic health care, than somebody sitting in a ministry in Delhi. That's not going to happen, right? So I would like to have the money given unconditionally to the states and let the states be accountable for delivering those public services. They are closest to the people. They feel the pain when people complain about not having nurses or doctors there and so on. So that's the best way to deliver those public services. In fact, we are doing it to improve public services.
But tell me, is there a mechanism that is being created through Niti Aayog, etc., where the centre and states work together and they get guided by a platform which is a cooperative federalism platform?
Venu, in a democracy, the best mechanism is the accountability of facing the people.
Okay.
Right? That is accountability. Jawabdehi tabhi hota hai. So that's what we are trying to do. Now, obviously, there is a lot that we can do in terms of best practices sharing, randomized control trials to see whether things are happening well or not being done well. All of that Niti will do. For sure, Niti will do that. But ultimately, it comes down to where does accountability rest? And I can assure you, when you have the right people, I can see it in front of my own eyes. Venu, in Jharkhand, we did not have a stable majority government for 14 years. We had various people who had, a very short-term view of being in government, and the quality of public services, the quality of infrastructure on the ground was abysmal. Now we have a stable majority government, we have a chief minister who's committed to working on behalf of the people of Jharkhand, and the changes are dramatic and obvious.
So For instance, can see visible changes?
Visible changes. I'll give you an example, right? Previously, when I would do my tours in my constituency and I'd go, deep into my interior villages and so on, people would be complaining all the time, Riddha pension nahi mila, jo aur bhi jo pensions hote hain, wo nahi mile. Now, the first thing that the chief minister did, Honorable Shri Raghuvar Das ji, fabulous idea. India. Virtually, the moment the government came into power, he said, I am going to do camps in each village so that people who are eligible for these pensions are going to be able to get these pensions. And people went, they signed up, जिन को मिलना था, उन्होंने फॉर्म भरे. अब आज के दिन 3-4 महीने बाद में everybody is getting those pensions. You can see it's transformed how people think about government when we can deliver these basic public services to them.
Okay. So let's hope decentralization works in other states like it has in Jharkhand. On
Starting
that note,
to work.
Thank you very much for talking to us, Mr. Jayant Sinha. That's all we have in this edition of State of the Economy, special edition. And we'll be back with you next week. Thanks for watching.